A massacre of historic proportions was revealed at Gaza's largest hospital this Monday. Yet, with Israel's bombing of the Iranian consulate in Syria, followed by the deliberate targeting of Western passport-holding aid workers, the story has been all but buried. Now, you may be asking yourself what makes this massacre so egregious, and why should this be receiving so much more coverage than it currently is? Well, on Monday, following a 2-week-long siege of Gaza's largest medical complex, the Shifa hospital, the Israeli military finally withdrew. Over 400 civilians in and around the complex were found in crudely dug mass graves and even left inside the hospital's hallways, as journalists discovered crushed, burned, and scattered body parts as far as the eye could see. Doctors, women, and even children were executed, many of which were found bound with zip ties and displayed signs of torture. In what constituted one of the worst massacres in the history of the Palestine-Israel conflict, testimony after testimony detailed the deprivation of food, water, and medical supplies to the sick and injured. In addition to this, widespread torture and humiliation of helpless civilians was noted, all as the Israeli military bragged about its successful operation. Israeli officials claimed that their military had killed only armed fighters, with former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett claiming on media that not one civilian was killed, and that of the some 500 Palestinians kidnapped, all were fighters, including the doctors and journalists taken. While one of the most consistent Israeli propaganda allegations against Hamas has been their alleged use of Palestinians as human shields, a claim for which there has never been any evidence recorded to prove, according to Euromed Human Rights Monitor, Israeli soldiers were using Palestinians as human shields against their will to guard their forces at Al-Shifa hospital. Israel attempted to justify its re-invasion of the hospital with a claim that Hamas was using it again as a military base and displayed photos of old rifles as their alleged evidence. This was the same tactic used back in November when Israeli forces invaded Al-Shifa, also committing what Amnesty International said were clear signs of war crimes at that time. As for the claims made in November, backed up by the US government, that a Hamas base existed at Al-Shifa hospital, and that a complex network of tunnels were set up underneath it where Israeli prisoners were possibly being held, these allegations were scrutinized by the international media for having no proof to back them up. The Israeli military is yet to produce a single video or photos that show them engaging in armed combat with the claimed hundreds of fighters, or even arresting these fighters at Al-Shifa hospital, after having invading it 4 separate times during the war. However, back in January, an anonymous US official told Reuters that they then believed that the hospital was being used by Hamas in the past, but they left by the time of the initial invasion, which is both an admission that they were wrong in supporting Israel's initial claims and an assertion grounded in pure speculation, to say the least. Despite the gravity of the US-Israeli claims regarding Al-Shifa, not a single piece of evidence has been produced to support their extravagant and ever-changing conspiracy theories. Instead, we are left with the evidence of Israeli soldiers committing a litany of egregious war crimes, including doing 2 things they use as the grounds for their invasion of the site: using hospitals as a base for military activities, and taking Palestinians as human shields. Yet this story has now been drowned out by the deliberate attack on World Central Kitchen aid workers, and seems to no longer be of much interest to the mainstream corporate media.